Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, The ABCs of Developing a Marketing Strategy. My name is Emma Hollister, and I'm the Network Manager at Small Business Majority, and I'm pleased to be presenting this as part of our ongoing Business Leader Briefing series. I'm very pleased that we are joined today by Mark Taxel, who's Senior Partner at I.C.E. Marketing Group, LLC, based out of New York, and some of his colleagues who are on the line. And we'll be hearing from Mark in just a few moments. Before we get underway, however, I do want to cover a few housekeeping tips. This presentation is being recorded, and it will be made available as a video through Small Business Majority's YouTube page following the conclusion of the presentation. So please keep an eye out on our past events page for a posting of this video and recording. If you miss any part of the presentation or you know someone who would benefit from hearing it, please check out that page. I will send out a link that includes the information for where you'll be able to find this video once it's posted following the conclusion of the presentation today. Also, following the conclusion of today's presentation, I'll be sending out a copy of the slides that form the basis of the presentation today. So keep an eye out in your inbox for that email. I do want to note that we have a chat function. It's on the left-hand side of your screen. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please chat them there. We'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation, or if any come in as the presentation is going on and we can address them quickly, we'll try to get to those as well. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker on today's presentation. He is Mark Taxel, the founder and senior partner of I.C.E. or I.C.E. Marketing Group. Mark began consulting in 1995 after retiring from the Seagram Company, where he was an executive vice president of marketing. Over the course of 28 years there, he held successive senior positions at Seagram and worked with many of their brands. He is also a seasoned strategic brand management professional who brings C-level expertise to each of his clients, and he is recognized as an authority in brand identity with a strong operational experience. His clients have included businesses such as Sidney Frank, the North Fork Bank, Riviera Imports, and Benestream, and he also has served as an adjunct professor of marketing at NYU Stern Graduate School of Business. Since 1996, he was principal consultant of Positive Promotions, Inc., where he developed and managed operational and served as COO and was a member of the Board of Advisors. In 2007, he helped found the American Catalog Mailers Association and served as its founder and served from its founding until 2013 as the VP Treasurer and the director and a member of its executive committee. And we're very pleased that he has joined us today to present the ABCs of developing a marketing strategy. And with that, I'll turn it over to him. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Emma. Sounds like my eulogy. Anyway, it's great to be with you all, and I hope you find it informative. I want to point out one thing at the onset, that the reason this is titled the ABCs of Marketing Strategy as opposed to Marketing Strategy A through Z is that this is a very abbreviated outline of a very intense and involved subject. So if you feel that there are elements that are missing, have you heard other things that should be included, of course, you're probably correct. But I think that what we're trying to do is to provide a framework and a context that would help a senior business manager develop a strategy that would be useful and in guiding their business. So with that, I want to let's look at the discussion outline for today's presentation. We'll briefly talk about the strategy versus a plan, and there's a big difference, and I will try to highlight that. Then we will talk about the situation analysis and the strategic option phases. Then go on to the phase of how you select a strategy, and then finish with conclusions. So first, let's talk about a marketing strategy versus a marketing plan. First of all, I want to give you the best definition that I've ever heard for strategy. and it's very simple. What are we going to rely on to win? I'm going to repeat that because I think that if you write that down and you think about it when you're doing your strategies, it's going to focus you. What are we going to rely on to win? So when you compare what a marketing strategy versus a marketing plan is, essentially the strategy provides the framework and the direction. The plan essentially are the details and the tactics. Strategy has a huge amount of analysis, and we'll talk about the kinds of analysis that you need to do. Is really addressing the mid to the long term, is very senior management driven, is general enough to allow for flexibility. It's almost like your constitution. How are you going to operate, and what are the parameters of operation versus the details, and should answer the key questions for your business's development and particularly sustainability, whereas the plan is shorter term, tactical, also flexible, obviously, but it's going to follow the strategy. So here are the recommended steps in developing a strategy. The first step, and we'll cover each one in various levels of detail. The first is the situational analysis. There are a number of components to that. The next is developing options, and I'll mention this now and I'll repeat it later. When you're developing a strategy, you should have alternate options to select from. And then you're going to go through a process of how to prove or select one that you believe is going to give you the highest degree of success in terms of your business situation. From the strategy selection, there will be objectives. There are elements to the strategic plan that have to be covered. We'll talk about main ones. And importantly, whenever you have developed a strategy, assessing the risks and threats realistically, and then going back and making adjustments based on your assessment of those risks and threats is a critical part of the process. So let's talk a little bit about the situational analysis. As we go through this, you'll see there are 4 segments for the situational analysis. But I want to point out importantly that frequently, particularly with smaller businesses, it's easy to give this part of the strategy process short shrift, not to spend a lot of time and attention on it. And as we go through this, you'll see why that's a critical mistake, because this part of the strategy planning or process provides the underpinnings and thinking from which a strategy should evolve. Now, there are 4 segments to this. One is evaluating the industry that you're operating in and the segments that you're going to compete in. The second is the competition. The third is customers and consumers. And the last is a self-assessment of your brand or your business. So the first element is looking at the industry. And to be successful here, you have to be very focused. So, for instance, if you were entering the, let's say, for instance, you were entering the smartphone business. Would you define your industry as technology? Would you define it as communications? Would you define it as? But defining that your industry in a realistic sense, so that you can then identify the basis of competition, is one of the first critical factors. Now, once you've defined the industry, there are a number of aspects of that industry that need to be evaluated, and I've listed one in particular, which are distribution channels. Years ago, we were doing work with McKinsey, and McKinsey pointed out that in their work, that while product and product benefits were obviously critical for success of any business, that they would rather have a mediocre to good product and great distribution effectiveness as opposed to a great product and mediocre to poor distribution effectiveness. So when you select, not only look at the channels, but understand the factors for success in that channel. And I mean by channel, whether you're going to be in retail, whether you're going to be online, what form of online, catalog, having salespeople being the primary sales focus, whether it's whatever the aspects in that industry that are, and your segment that you've selected, the understanding the distribution channels and what the success factors in each of those channels, and the other levers for success in that industry. So, for instance, in some industries it may be advertising driven, some may be innovation driven, or innovation may be, if it's a mature industry, innovation may not necessarily be the driving factor at a given point. But having a clear definition of the success factors and the drivers for success in that industry is a critical part of this whole process. Now, once you have completed your industry analysis, and by the way, after each of these segments, you should, if you're doing following the process correctly, you should have a set of conclusions. So, because sometimes if you're doing this kind of analysis, you may have pages and pages or slides and slides of documents, but what are the key conclusions that you're going to be using to base your strategy from that particular analytical piece? So now we talk about competitors, and when you're choosing your competitors, it's very important to look at both the direct and the indirect. But the most important competitors should have what we call a SWOT analysis. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their opportunities, and what are their threats? And then we talk about the cost of competition. Frequently, particularly for young businesses, not understanding what it's going to cost to compete with existing competitors and also potential new entrants in a market can be the difference between success and failure. Certainly many businesses are on the short term underfunded, but if you don't have a good understanding of the long-term cost of competition, and which is going to start to tell you what you're going to need to do to succeed over the long term, then you could end up spending a lot of time or spinning wheels. Now, the other thing in the competitive analysis is the concept of substitution. And here, I think that really understanding the concept of substitution can help to drive both an analytical piece and also developing opportunities. And the best example that I've ever seen was in the soft drink business or the beverage business. For years, Coca-Cola and Pepsi thought they were competing with one another directly. So the substitution was it's either, if you're a cola, it's either Coke or Pepsi or something else. And then the next level of drawing of substitution was diet, and then the next level was other carbonated soft drinks. And at that point, if they felt that was a total opportunity in the market, they were bound by competing with one another. But then people started realizing, water. And actually, early on, the people who were competing at the core level never saw water as a threat. But obviously, we all know that over the years, water became a threat. In fact, it's continuing to. Water and various other forms of healthier beverages are now clear substitute potentials for carbonated soft drinks. So the only reason I point all of that out is that when you're developing a competitive analysis, you should be thinking about what are the product forms or services forms substituting for? What is the different levels of competition? Now, the next group or level of analysis in the situation is customers and consumers. And I think here having an ability to identify who your customers are and who they are, where they are, why they're existing customers or potential customers, what needs that your business is going to satisfy that they have, what particularly if they have their unmet needs, then what, understanding the nature of those needs is going to be critical in your strategy, because it's possible that your product or service format should be driven towards true unmet needs. And of course, there are always other factors that you need to look at. Now, when you're doing this, there are a number of ways to do it. Basically the place that we always start is secondary research through the internet. But if you don't feel that you understand enough about your customers or potential customers based on your own interaction with them on a normal basis, then I always suggest various forms of research, whether they be focus groups, one-on-one interviews, other forms of surveys. Today, email surveys are, they may not be accurate statistically, but they're very effective directionally. And if you want to understand more about your prospects who are potential customers or consumers, in today's world, you can very often find and pay for email lists that are very specific to the marketplace that you're interested in. You can send out surveys or try to reach people on the telephone. And the important thing is getting a deep understanding of the current customers and the prospective customers in terms of formulating your strategy. Which leads me to the last part of the situational analysis, which is a self-assessment or your brand equity review or your business equity review. A very, very critical piece, and very often one that's not done as honestly as we'd like it to be, because it requires you to take a step back and to look at your own business situation or your prospective business situation as an outsider, taking the rosy glasses off and putting the hard microscope on, doing that same SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And for the self-assessment, concentrating on threats is as important as identifying opportunities. You must address those threats in your strategy, because if you overlook them or you don't take a very serious view of them, it can become your Achilles heel. Even if you're in a B2B situation, your position of your brand relative to competition, what unique values you're providing, what is the benefit structure of that you're going to offer to the customer, and what is the relative importance of those benefits? Where are you getting your volume from? Who is almost any business is acquiring customers from some other source or usage occasion. You may be, even if when you take a look at highly innovative forms there, and let's go back a few years before the smartphone, somebody had this really creative vision that through a telephone they could get data. Now that essentially has taken its source of volume from somewhere else. And all I'm suggesting here is that part of the analysis of where the source of volume is today and where it can come from in the future may be the critical factor for your developing a realistic strategy for growth. You obviously need to understand the profit drivers. Is it, cost, marketing, innovation, distribution. Clearly to analyze, and where you sit relative to where you need to be, and that really leads to sustainability. That when you've looked at this whole current assessment, and if it's positive, is it sustainable? And that's where you get back to the threats. What factors could lead to a glitch in the road? And most businesses have them, and those of us who are able to look down the road and to envision them tend to be more successful because we're then prepared to deal with them in a constructive fashion, hopefully an offensive fashion as opposed to defense. So now we get to the section where we're selecting a strategy. And as I pointed out early on, that when you're doing a marketing strategy, you have done the situational analysis, you've developed the conclusions about your industry, about competitors, about your customers and about your brand. You probably should create a list of what you now think are the key factors for success in your business based on that analysis. And some people call them success levers. And they should not be a page long. They should be a half a dozen things that are going to form, the underpinnings of your strategy. Essentially, the success levers are what one would have to rely on to win conceptually in order to, if your strategy is going to answer those questions. It's clear. So so essentially, you're going to start in selecting a strategy with the underlying assumptions that come out of the situational analysis. What are the underlying economics? The nature of competition, as you saw, is it static? Is it in flux? Is it in flux? Is it changing? The channel requirements and stability, the state of innovation, price and margin stability. In every category, eventually there's a category killer, someone who comes along and thinks they're going to steal the business on price. And people who don't recognize that, particularly if you're early in a market where the margins are strong, and you set back and who are the potential category killers and what is the response? Because if you're going to respond, you have to have build a benefit structure or build a position in the market that is not totally susceptible to price competition. And that leads you to testing those assumptions. Once you've developed those assumptions, honestly saying to yourself or having your team say, are these assumptions true? Have we fairly, are they, will they withstand scrutiny from, if I showed this to someone on the outside, would they say that makes sense to me? And the key with assumptions, are they sustainable? So what we're now talking about are the necessities of a strategy. What are the key elements of a strategy or the necessities? And these are basically the core elements. One is you need to clearly define and refine your product position, its branding, and its core benefit structure. And if you have more than 2 or 3 sentences or 4 or 5 elements to this, you're probably not very focused. You may have multiple segments of your business, in which case each of those segments may require a different strategic focus That's something that you have to decide on your own. Again, then you're going to clearly understand and define the competitive framework. Which segment of the industry and what is the nature of competition that you're going to be competing in? And what are the key factors that create opportunity in that segment? Now, critically, the next is sizing the market. You've defined that segment. How large is that segment in terms of dollars? Is it an attractive market? Does it have good, or is it very price-driven? Does it have attractive margins? Is it easy for competitors to enter? What are the barriers to entry? And what you're going to do in your strategy to build barriers to entry or to build a competitive position that's like a little fortress. Now, I'll go back to the sources of volume. The first element in defining your source of volume in your strategy is defining that core consumer or customer. The next is defining the aggregate value of that user, and what their current consumption is. Is that user, whether it be a business or an individual, their consumption in that category growing or declining? Now, within the source of volume is what is your current share of market? In other words, if you look at the total competitive framework in that segment, how big is that market? What is your current market share? And what is your ultimate market share goal? Now, you may say, well, how do I know? And in some cases, particularly in the e-commerce world, it may be difficult. You may have to rely on some industry sources to basically size what you think the market looks like. You obviously know what your own share is. But one of the things you need to remember, and this is really important, in the long term, usually your share position in the market is going to define the ability to make money. The high share customers tend to make the most money, and the middle share customers tend to have sustainable positions at least, but they're very vulnerable. And the low share competitors tend to be in the most vulnerable position. Now, some cases you may say, well, I'm in a very small segment of that market that's very profitable, so I have a low share. Then what you need to do is redefine your market so that you're understanding what your position is in your price segment, because it's frequently, the segmentation definition is going to give you a much clearer position on how you want to compete and who, in the end, and what the factors are that are going to drive your success. What product or service will your product substitute for? And I talked about substitution earlier. I don't want to beat a dead horse with it, but I think that in that substitution concept, you need to define what your benefit or differential advantage is to gain that business, to gain that customer, to gain that consumption occasion. Also, what is the barrier to trial, for yourself or competitors? If someone if someone can gain trial by going on Facebook and looking at a product and getting a good idea of it, and that provides enough information, that's low. If someone has to buy a new computer and spend a couple of $1,000s in order to try the product, the trial barrier is high. All of that is going to have an influence on how you market. And of course, who are the competitors for that volume source? Now, the next element in your strategy is the price versus value. If it's a new product or service or an existing product with new benefits, again, critically is what is the pricing that you're selecting sustainable? Is it providing a sufficient margin to bring the product to market? Can competitors, direct or indirect, easily match or beat your pricing position? Will customers have to pay a premium for your product, or will it be a value product? If it's a premium, is it sustainable? When you select the strategy and the pricing strategy, is it going to cover all of your marketing costs, product costs? Is it going to, distribution costs? Is it going to provide you with a sustainable profit? And then again, the rationale or proof for your pricing position. If you end up saying to yourself something like, well, let's try something and we'll see, that's okay as long as you have a clear knowledge of where you can go and what the impact of that will be. I've always believed it's better to start high. You can always lower the price. It's very hard to start low and then raise it. The next element of the strategy is what they call placement. And placement meaning, what channel are you going to compete in? Are people going to find the product on the internet, in stores? Are they going to, and what is where and how is it going to be distributed? What are the challenges and the obstacles for selecting that channel? A lot of people believe that they can easily start an e-commerce business, and it's true that you can put up a website, put up your products and forms and information, but you'll quickly find out that it's like putting up a dot in the ocean until you figure out how to have people find your site, the right people find it, and then for them to have reasons to act on it. So understanding the cost of getting people to find you, just the same way, I always liken an internet business that is if you had a store in a city and that there was no address, no sign on the store, and no directory that tells you where to find it. You need to understand clearly what the elements are in the placement of your product or service, and how people are going to find it, how the right people are going to find it, and what is the cost of the initial entry and the sustainability. Obviously, if your product is available in multiple channels, it gets a lot more complicated. And the last P, that's promotion in the strategy, is really the elements of marketing. You've defined the market target. You've defined the sources of and the cost of generating awareness and interest to penetrate the market. You've discovered, or you're hypothesizing, what incentives you need to provide or information you need to provide consumers or customers to get trial. You have figured out what is the criteria for adoption. What unique experience are you going to offer that's going to get people who are aware to say, I really want to try that product. And then you have to determine in your strategy what is the sustaining cost of maintaining those customers once that you've gotten them to try the product. So now we get to toward the end of this, which is going to give us about 15 to 20 minutes for questions. And so the summary that for the strategic plan, I'm just waiting for the slide to change. Next slide, please. So now is the point where I'm going to tell you what I told you. The strategic plan will define the market target and the nature of competition. It defines the sources of volume. It provides clear branding and positioning goals. It sets long-term objectives for sales, share, margin, profit. It addresses sustainability, factors for success, and it provides an assessment for risks, both external and internal. Now, I have a couple of more final thoughts before we can go to questions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Planning is a discipline. It's not something that when you're deciding to do a strategic marketing plan, it's not something that you can sit down with one morning, write it on a piece of paper, and say, I've got it done. It clearly needs to be supported by facts or defensible theories and assumptions, which are going to be garnered through your internal knowledge, external research, as much as you can find. It has to be then boiled down to simplicity and using critical thinking. You're going to start with a lot of data. Starting with a data dump is fine, but getting it down to a simple, critical facts and ideas is going to make it workable. It must be flexible and adjust to market conditions. And if the market conditions change severely, if the basis of competition explodes, then you may have to start all over again or make huge adjustments. Lastly, two things. One is you want to review the plan and see where you are against it on a regular basis, and you want to do it within your organization. If you're a small business, a lot of small business people think these things belong in their pockets. They only want to share it with one or two people. My experience is the more understanding within the organization of what your strategy is, what your marketing strategy is, how you're going to execute it, the more alignment you will have within your company and the more buy-in you will have from your employees and managers in terms of what how to execute. So with that, I will do a short commercial, and then we'll take questions. We are the I.C.E. Marketing Group. We are a strategic and tactical brand marketing company or partner. We give advice on brand management and as well as marketing services. We are able to provide a suite of services ranging from a strategy audit, developing the full service marketing plans, executing, developing the executional elements and executing those plans. And in some cases, certain businesses don't have the assets to have a high-level CMO. We're willing to provide that on a short or long-term basis to help to manage your marketing if need be. And we can provide these services to both B2C and B2B sectors of the universe. So now, are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Mark. Before we get to the questions, I just want to remind folks that we will be sending out a copy of the slide deck that forms the basis of today's presentation. That will be going out to folks in a follow-up email. So please keep an eye out for that in your inboxes shortly. I also want to let folks know, if you missed at the beginning of the presentation, that we will be, or we have been, and we are recording this presentation today. So we'll be setting up a video that will allow you to view the slides and hear the content from Mark. And so I will be sending out a link. We'll be able to view that once that video is up. So with that, I do see that we are having a lot of questions coming in. And one of the questions is just a couple of requests about those slides. And so I just want to let folks know that they will be coming to your inboxes, so to keep an eye out for that. And with that, we'll see if Mark has any questions that he'd like to answer at this time.
Well, there are a lot of them and a lot of good ones. The first one was, what is the one thing we can do right away to develop a marketing strategy? And I think my advice would be to start with the assessment and spend the time to do the assessment, because, as I mentioned at the beginning, without a good understanding of those elements, you're going to be doing a marketing plan and not a marketing strategy. Of course, you have to have a plan, but a true strategy requires a deep understanding of the marketplace. And in terms of providing tips, someone asked how to do this on limited resources. I think if you go and take a look at these slides, I tried to develop this in a way that allows you to work with the resources that are available, but you need to be creative about that. And of course today, with the internet and the amount of information that's available, I think that a lot of what you're looking for can be done through internet research or industry or government data, and then you really need to kind of identify what data is really critical. I mean, any business, even ones that are very large, try to limit the amount of data, and that's why defining the market that you're competing in fairly carefully will limit the amount of time and resources that you need to develop a plan. Somebody asked here, can I give an example of rationale or proof? Okay, let's say that that my assumption is I'm going to be entering the smartphone market, and that the assumption I'm making is, because of the high price of Apple products, that there's an opportunity for low price competition. And the proof with that would be that finding enough evidence among customers that they're interested, and identifying who those customers are that are price sensitive, willing to give up the quality values that, and of course you could say, well, that's easy, but I think your proofs have to be, particularly for a major assumption, have to be validated, whether it be through research or through talking to customers and prospects, and getting honest viewpoints from third parties. Somebody asked, these days, can email be an effective part of a marketing strategy? That someone could identify email as a channel for communication. Yes, the kinds of emails, that would be a marketing tactic. 3 key steps of brand development for brand development of service business. We'd have to really understand the context of the business. I think if you go back and look at the steps that we mentioned earlier, that it's likely that you will be able to develop those steps yourself. If not, you can always hire us, and we'll be happy to help. We're not as expensive as most people think we are. I'm a general manager of a restaurant. How can I convince the owner that the restaurant to invest in a better paying plan? I've worked, in large organizations and small, and I think that you need to understand with an owner is, the framework that they operate in. Sometimes people don't see the world the way you do, and if you're dealing in a small business and you're a manager and you want to convince, the senior management or ownership to go in a new direction, you really need to put your plan in the context that that that's relevant to them, and sometimes that's almost impossible to do. Are there more? Are there other questions, or am I missing it? There are.
We've got one question here that asks, how often do you recommend that a small business does a full-blown marketing analysis? Do you think annually it's frequent enough, or would you recommend doing it more frequently than that?
No, I think that a good time to update your strategy or to review the effectiveness of it is after you finished a financial period, and when you have a little bit of a lull to basically go back and say how have you performed versus your strategy, and did the underlying assumptions of the strategy hold up? If those underlying assumptions have started to change, it's time to, what are the implications of those changes? Are they important or critical? If I was a retailer and I started a great hardware business, and all of a sudden, and I never expected Walmart to be a mile away, and all of a sudden Walmart moves in, do I just close up shop, or what do I have to do? Actually, something like that happened in a town next to where I live. There were a number of very successful high-end food retailers that each one had a different position, all did well, and then all of a sudden a large regional chain moved into a very a good location in that town, and if I were any one of them, I would be reassessing my position. I know that one of them actually decided to open up a second store in an area where they didn't expect that such a competitor would actually go as a backup. That was their end. But having contingency plans, if the assumptions under your strategy, change, and I think generally annually is the right way to go. I mean, if you have a marketing plan, you should really take a look at how you're doing against your plan on a quarterly basis. Anybody who does that on a monthly basis is more interested in Wall Street than operating their business.
And we have one question about what are some common mistakes that small businesses make when setting a marketing strategy, or are there any pitfalls that people should be particularly wary of in your experience?
I think kind of the overly relying on internal thinking. I think not getting enough external thinking in the process. Even a small business can ask for to try to get a group of outside advisors to help them. A lot of people are willing to do it on a very limited fee basis, or they're people who like you or interested in your business, like your accountants and attorneys, or former college professors. But I think that having when you're doing a strategy, having some outside input is always helpful, and without it, you get a little too much groupthink, and I think groupthink is one of the critical things that can make strategies fail, because you're operating based on just internal assumptions and not using the external environment and looking at it sufficiently to be realistic. And also, sometimes you miss tremendous opportunities, or you think those opportunities are there, but you don't understand the cost of and the cost of taking advantage of those opportunities.
Great. Mark, thank you so much for your time and answering all those questions. I know there are a few more questions that folks have asked, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time and make sure you all have time to get to your next meetings. So with that, I just wanted to ask Mark, do you have any concluding remarks before we wrap up today's webinar?
The only one that I have is some people, frequently people think that they're too small to spend time to develop a marketing strategy. I think that you're never too small. You just have to find carve out some think time and to put pencil to paper in terms of an outline. What do you need to do? Some of these steps you may say they're not important for my business, but before you start investing time in developing a marketing plan and putting money against it, you should really, have a pretty good idea of what, why, how, and where, and feel pretty comfortable that you've done a serious look. And it also gives you not only a jumping off point, but a place to look back at and say, how am I doing?
Great. Thank you so much. With that, I just want to note that the contact information for I.C.E. Marketing Group is up on your screen. I'll leave it up for a few more moments. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can certainly reach directly out to them. You can also reach out to me. Again, my name is Emma Hollister, and I'm the Network Manager at Small Business Majority. And you can get in touch with me by responding to any of the emails that you receive about today's presentation. Please keep an eye out in your inbox for the follow-up emails. And with that, I want to thank Mark Taxel very much for joining us on today's presentation. Thanks to all of you for participating. And please keep your eye out for our upcoming event. Thanks so much.